What's up everyone and welcome back to another video. So as you probably know, KovaaK's FPS aim trainer is one of the most popular aim trainers for Fortnite PC players, but with an enormous amount of unique scenarios to choose from and the complexities that come with aim training, I know a lot of you guys are probably struggling to find the right KovaaK's routine for you. So that's why in today's video I'll be going over the best KovaaK's routine to improve your aim dramatically in Fortnite. Before we get into it, be sure to drop a like if this video helps you out and consider subscribing as well if you're new to the channel and want to see more content just like this in the future. And of course, it's always appreciated if you could use code Teckoh in the item shop. It's completely free for you. It only takes a few seconds to type in and it seriously does help me out a bunch. So as always, a massive thank you to everyone who uses my code. But with that said and without further ado, let's get into today's video. So starting off this video, I want to begin by discussing the categories of scenarios. So generally there are three different types of KovaaK scenarios when it comes to aiming. These include click timing, which is generally when you move your cursor onto a target and click, think like shotguns and stuff like that. Then you've got tracking, where you hold your mouse on the target and you spray, so that's more SMGs and ARs. And then you've got target switching, which is going from target to target and tracking them. Click timing and tracking are super common within Fortnite and they compose almost all of your aim within Fortnite. Target switching is a very important skill in FPS games, but in Fortnite it's really not that common. If you think of Valorant for example, oftentimes the coolest clips you're going to see are when somebody blasts one player then flicks across their screen straight to another one, and that's what target switching is. It still does exist in Fortnite, but not quite to the same extent as the first two. We're still going to practice target switching, but not quite as much as click timing and tracking, simply because it's not as commonly used within Fortnite. So with that said, I'm going to start with click timing scenarios and then I'm going to move on to tracking, and then lastly I'll cover a few target switching scenarios. So starting off, we're going to go over some click timing scenarios. We're going to have a lot of scenarios here, so just bear with me for now as we get through all of them, and then later in the video we're going to talk about how exactly to structure the routine. Also, just so you guys know, the footage I use for these scenarios is going to be from various streamers and content creators, largely the world records, so don't worry if the way your aim looks doesn't stack up even close to these, because it's not supposed to. Most of these people have been grinding KovaaK's for years, so don't expect to be at this point. So the first click timing scenario we have in this video is going to be the good old classic tile frenzy. This is pretty much the OG KovaaK scenario and it's the one pretty much everyone thinks of when they think of KovaaK's. And honestly, while it's not the most realistic to Fortnite, it does help you improve your flicks and shotgun aim overall, so it's definitely worth using in some capacity. In tile frenzy, your goal should be to be smooth and consistent, and the speed's going to build up eventually. Don't worry about trying to switch between targets super fast or build a crazy score. Moving on from that, and our second click timing scenario is going to be one wall, one target. This scenario is another very simple one. It's just one wall, one target, you shoot the target, you flick to the next one, shoot it, on and on. This scenario is fantastic for helping you improve your longer flicks. In this scenario, be patient after you flick to make sure you're hitting the target as well. Onto our third click timing scenario though, and we've got bounce 180. Bounce 180 is a super useful shotgun scenario because it helps you improve hitting a fast moving target, and it's one of those scenarios that helps you a bunch with actual shotgun fights. The bounce 180 scenario is a bit hard to be honest because it actually requires a decent amount of precision and timing. So another option you have instead, if you're at a more beginner level, is to begin with bounce 180 large instead. Bounce 180 large is pretty much the same exact thing except it has larger targets. That'll allow you to dial in your fundamentals before you get into the more difficult stuff, and it'll make bounce 180 easier eventually. Onto our next scenario though, and we've got one wall, five targets pasu. This scenario is one of the more difficult click timing ones on our list for sure. That's mainly because the targets are super unpredictable. In a sense, you have to get your crosshair onto the target while also tracking it in a way, but since they change direction so often, you have to be efficient with the way you flick to the target, the way you line up your shot and click. So overall, this is another great scenario. Our next scenario is one wall, six targets small, and this is going to be our last click timing scenario. The reason I like this one so much is because it helps you improve at tapping targets from a distance and also helps a ton when it comes to precision. Being precise with your shots is super important in FPS games, and this is one of those scenarios that helps a bunch with it. Onto our second section though, and next up we're going to be talking about tracking, which basically refers to SMG and AR aim. So starting off, our first tracking scenario is going to be air. Air is a scenario where a target moves around near you and your goal is simply to track it. This closely resembles an SMG fight, and it really helps you to stay smooth and consistent with your close range SMG aim. Second up, we've got close long strafes invincible, which is another SMG type scenario. This one has the target basically moving around you rather than up and down and all around, and it requires you to be very consistent and smooth just like in air. Overall, it's another very useful scenario for your close range SMG aim. On to scenario number 3 for tracking, and we've got thin aiming long invincible. Personally, this is one of my favorite scenarios because it requires you to be extremely precise and build smoothness in your aim. To get a good score in this one, you have to be very consistent and you can't have choppy aim at all. This scenario helps you really to build that smoothness up, and overall it's really good for precision and accuracy in longer range AR shot. Moving on to our fourth and final scenario for tracking though, and we've got a super popular one which is Ascended Tracking V3. This scenario is great because it has multiple directions, targets on multiple heights, and a variety of ranges. It's a super well-rounded option, and I think that's a good one to wrap up our tracking section. Moving on to target switching though, and for this section we're gonna have less scenarios simply because it's not as prevalent within Fortnite. It's not very common within Fortnite that you have two targets right next to each other and you have to switch super fast. It's generally just one person you're shooting at and trying to kill at a time. But with that said, it's still a very important skill to have and can kind of carry over to your click timing and tracking as well. So so I do want to include at least some scenarios for it. With that said, the first target switching scenario is going to be bounce 180 tracking. This scenario is basically the same as bounce 180, which we went over earlier, except it's switching to the target and tracking the target instead of just click timing. Also guys, if you struggle with this, similar to bounce 180, you can also use bounce 180 tracking large, which is literally just the same exact scenario with bigger targets if you're more of a beginner. And lastly guys, our final scenario is going to be kin target switch. This is another target switching scenario, which is from a bit more range, and it's a very similar concept to bounce 180 tracking, except that the targets move straight. Overall, it's another great scenario to improve your target switching. So with that said, that's going to wrap it up for all the scenarios in this video. The last thing I want to touch on very briefly is just setting up the routine. Now, what I recommend you guys do for this routine is to choose 6 or 7 scenarios at a time mixed up between each category and grind those for some time. Then choose a different combination after a couple of days or a couple of weeks and grind those out. This is going to keep everything fresh and won't overload you with a ton of scenarios at a time. Basically, I want you guys to cycle through them. With that said, I'm going to show you guys everything now so you can screenshot them or do whatever you need to do. So I'm going to put each of the click timing scenarios up on screen right now. Then here's the list of all the tracking scenarios, and then here's the list of all the target switching scenarios. But with all that said, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on the best KovaaK's routine in Fortnite Chapter 4. Overall, by following this routine, you should find your aim improving dramatically within Fortnite. If you found this video helpful, then I would really appreciate if you could drop a like on it and consider subscribing as well if you're new to the channel and want to see more Fortnite tips and tricks content just like this in the future. And lastly, if you want to show some extra support, I would really appreciate it if you'd use code Teckoh in the item shop. It's 100% free for you. It only takes a few seconds to type in, and it seriously does help me out a bunch. As always, a big thank you to everyone who uses my code. But with that said, thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.